Hello and welcome to a recreated recap from a live workshop on best practices for online learning. This workshop was provided for consultants and staff at the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity, an organization I've worked with for the last 11 years and am proud to be a partner and contributor to their work. My name is Meagan Pollock and I am the founder and chief inclusion engineer for my company called Engineer Inclusion, where we provide services and resources that help people intentionally and equitably engineer equity and inclusion into their organizations. You can learn more at engineerinclusion.com. Because this is a recreated workshop, I'm just going to sort of work through the same slides that I did with the participants who were with us live. I've got a variety of resources that I've shared here, and I'm happy to share some handouts from these slides. This QR code will go to my website where you'll get most of the resources that I'm going to share today that I'm able to share publicly. And so again, you can visit this QR code and you'll find all the resources I'm going to share today. So when doing any kind of workshop, whatever platform that you're using, best practice is to always let people know about the platform. While we may feel like we are all pros at using Zoom now, sometimes some people are new to it. And so it's always better to let people know what they can expect from the platform. So at this point, I usually walk through each of the features with them. If you don't have closed captioning turned on for your implementation of Zoom, you should do that. It's a new feature that just rolled out a few weeks ago. And so if you go into your settings, you can turn that on. And so it's a live transcript that anyone can turn on. And that's really important as it improves accessibility for everyone. This is a good time to set your expectations for whether you want people to share their webcam with you or not. And it's always a good practice to point people to those reactions. I appreciate that Zoom really, simplified this feature for participants. And so show them how they can get there. Give them a moment to kind of try it out. You can always say, find those reactions for me and give me a signal. So you want to give people as many opportunities as they can to test things out. Another thing that's really important to me is to ask people to update their name. A lot of times if they're sharing a computer with someone, then they might have someone else's name that is on their login, or it comes up as their email, and you just don't know who they are. And so ask them to update their name and the way that they would like to be addressed so that you can always call them by name when they are speaking. And it's a great opportunity to ask people to share their pronouns as well. It doesn't matter how many degrees I might have. There's very little I can do as a facilitator to help people who are having technical difficulties. So just remind them that if all else fails, reset, log off, reboot, and usually the problems are solved with those measures. So as I go through this recap of the virtual workshop, I'm going to overview some best practices. And so those slides will look like this. And so best practice is, as I've said, tell or remind users of the features of the platform that you're using and really set clear expectations for how you want people to participate and engage. Give people time to play with and adjust to the new technologies. And so again, most of the time when I'm teaching, I'm doing virtual workshops, meaning I want people to engage with me. I want people to engage with the other participants. And so I try to set that expectation at the very beginning so that they know how I'd like for them to participate in our time together. Zoom put out some tips and tricks for educators early on in the COVID season. And so you can access that on my website as well. So for the workshop that we did, I divided up into 3 parts. First, we talked about annotation and chart paper. And then we talked about Jamboard and polling. And then gave some people some time to practice. If I ever have the opportunity when working with my clients to set the agenda, I always prefer to start on the hour because it allows me to have really clear, distinct segments, and I like 50 minutes. And at the beginning of the sort of shift to online learning, I thought that was going to be impossible. Like I just couldn't teach in that short of breaks. But you know what? It works out great. And it gives everyone a really distinct break time of I got the last 10 minutes to make, my activity tracking device happy. get our bodies in motion for a little bit and sort of reset and refuel. And so I am really particular about this when I'm teaching so that I stick to those breaks. I try to commit to them in the beginning and stick to them. That's different than when I teach in person for typical content around educational and workforce equity, is that I allow it to kind of be a little bit more flexible and kind of see how we feel, where the conversation is going. But I do not do that in this setting because people's attention spans, we're just pulled in so many different directions. And so I try to honor that as best as I can. A next best practice is, create some slides that help your users know what you're asking them to do. So I have some pretty standard slide layouts, for different things that I teach. I have different layouts, but I have one sort of slide signal that means I want you to chat or discuss. One that means we're going to take a poll, which is the orange one on the bottom left, or the annotation is the one with the pencil. And so because people are generally always distracted because they're at home, they're surrounded by lots of things, lots of browsers, you want to give people as many signals as you can so that when they log back on, they can, or bring their browser back to looking at what you're doing, they can sort of quickly get a clue of what it is that you want them to be doing. Next is, how do you arrange your screens? So here is a blown up picture of that. I don't know how anyone can do this work without multiple monitors. I have 2 external monitors, and generally when I'm in Zoom presentation mode, I've got something else that I'm showing on my smaller screen, my laptop screen. I usually have my iPad in front of me pulled up as a backup. So I'm not using it as a monitor, I'm just using it as a sort of backup logging into Zoom, or I've got some other screen that I'm working on open. You can see in the top, I've got a light that I use to sort of, brighten my face so people can see me. On the left monitor there, I usually always set up my windows that I'm going to be accessing there. So you can see I've got them so I can easily swap back and forth between what it is that I need, and I'm not having to sort of drag things over. So I get those ready before I start so I can easily swap. And then the screen that's right in front of me, I arrange my presenter notes if I need them. I arrange the video screens and sort of set up the list and chat as I need them. I personally like to have some paper right in front of me just for quick notes as well. And so somebody said to me, like, this is a command station, it's not a desk. And maybe that's true. I work from home, and so it certainly is a command station. I also recommend getting an external camera. What you don't see here is my external mic. When I'm trying to record quality video, I do use a big Yeti mic that's got a sound protective barrier on it, but I don't have it set up in this image. So takeaway here is dual monitors, in my opinion, are essential. And I actually tell people who are participating in my workshops that their experience will be improved if they have dual monitors as well. And dual monitors are so cheap now. Like, you can get a decent monitor for $100 or so, and or pick them up on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist. People are always upgrading, and so you could get something just to improve your experience. Something to keep in mind is that some of the new MacBook M1 processor laptops, MacBook Pros, do not handle 2 external monitors. So if you do upgrade to the new Macs, if you want 2 external monitors, you're going to need to get the Intel processor, the Intel chip, because the M1s, for whatever reason, can only handle 1. All right, so the guiding questions and objectives for, again, this recapped workshop were: 1, what technologies support active online learning? And so in this workshop's participants, we examined and tested some various technologies. And the reason why we did this is so NAEP is an organization that has a cadre of consultants that teach their curriculum to schools across the country. And so as we did this sort of hard pivot and shift to COVID, there were many people who were interested in using some of the technologies that I was using and wanted a little bit of an opportunity to practice those as well. So the next guiding question is, what are some instructional strategies that complement online learning? And so we tried to practice some inclusive instructional strategies during our time. Because this is a recap recording, like that's not necessarily going to be conveyed here, but I'll try to communicate those and how I use them as I go along. And then the last question that guided our conversation is, what are best practices for online instruction? And so we curated a list of strategies and resources as we were also practicing using some different tools. A best practice that I don't have listed here, but it is to offer some guiding questions and objectives to your participants. Let them know what they can expect. I mean, this is just good instructional strategy in general, but I think particularly in online learning, it's useful to, more useful to let them know what they're going to get out of this. And my experience and planning over the last year, shifting all of my in-person instruction to online, is you can cover about half as much as you could in the same time if you were in person, because you've got to take extra time for the sort of transition in and out of breakout rooms. It just takes a lot longer to do everything. And in the beginning, it was taking me 4 times as long to prepare because I was shifting everything to have a better slide layout and more instructions and other tools that I'll be going over today as well. I like to, at the beginning of my workshops, allow people to do some kind of introduction. If it's less than 10 people and the time, and we have, enough time for this to happen, I'll invite everyone to do a really quick introduction using their mic. If we have any more than 10, I ask people to do this in the chat, because otherwise it can become a runaway train where people kind of go on and on and on. And so you want to give people a moment to sort of show up and be present in the room. And so whatever way that you can do that in the beginning is helpful to the participants. The next thing that I do is to do some kind of check-in. And so I like to use the annotation feature in Zoom, where people can add a comment, a symbol, or their name, just to kind of let us know where they are. And so I have a little video that I just recorded on my screen using ScreenFlick, and it shows people how they can use the annotation tool in Zoom. And so it's really important that you help people kind of know what you're expecting. And so while you're running this, you can invite them to start playing with it on their screen, trying out the annotation tool. But this is a screen recording that you can do yourself, or I'll have on my website as well if you want to use this one. But again, you can record it however you like on your own screen. So how I do the check-in is I give some kind of image where it allows people to kind of give me a pulse check of how they're feeling. There are so many different ways that you could do this. This is just the one that I've been using over the last couple of months. And it gives people just somewhere where they can sort of drop their name, a check mark. Sometimes people put like emojis on here. They put sometimes they'll drop images. And it just lets you know where people are as they show up. So my best practice here is to always start with a mindfulness exercise or some kind of check-in before you dive into the content. This supports brain science, learning theory, and inclusive practices. So if you want to do like a 60-second sort of breathing exercise, if you want to do some kind of affirmation exercise, or just sort of like emotional check-in, this is a really good practice. If I have a larger group and enough time and a group that I know, you can do this on a more personal level, but if it's a group of people that you don't know that well, then you want to be mindful of that and creating some kind of environment that helps people be present, to sort of acknowledge where they are in that moment and to contribute to the time that they've committed to be present with you. The next best practice is to be wary of tech overload. So during the workshop that I did with Nate, we used lots of technologies because that was the objective, was to demonstrate some options for instruction. But I would never use all of the technologies that I went over with them in a single workshop because it's just too much for everyone. Some people get it. They either use the tools or they're really comfortable with technology. But for people who only have one monitor, the more you switch between technologies, the more challenging it's going to be. And so you just want to be really mindful of your audience and the duration of your session and just be selective in the number and type of technologies that you use. So the next thing that is a best practice for me is to make a list of resources that participants will need throughout the session. And so my resource list, I usually make it in a Google Drive, and I create a set of quick links. And I don't use the automatic numbering system here because when you copy and paste it, those numbers go away. So I make sure that I'm sort of hard typing in the numbers here. You don't need to start with 0. That's just a relic of my computer science programming past. And so I make sure to create bit.lys for all of the different links so that it doesn't take up a huge amount of space. And I actually very rarely have this many links. I try to keep it under 5, but because this was a group of professional instructors and I wanted to share lots of information with them, I did have a longer list. And so you number the list so that you can draw attention to those specific files. So I can say, okay, folks, access link number 2 for this part of the workshop. And so again, you want to copy that list before your session so you can quickly paste that link into the chat throughout the session. So you can paste the set of links throughout the session. Because if whoever joins the session, at least on Zoom, they don't see the history chat. So you want to be able to quickly paste it, and it's inevitable that you get halfway through a workshop and someone's like, what were the links again? You can just drop them right there, and you don't have to piecemeal them throughout. And so, again, this has been a lifesaver for me because generally when I'm leading workshops, I'm the single instructor, and so there's nobody that's sitting in the background that can sort of grab these things and drop them in. I'd like to go over suggested norms. These are some norms that I wrote based on some work with a group in Illinois. And so these are always really important to set the stage for the sort of tone that you want for the group. For this meeting, I offered that we want to stay engaged, we want to share the mic, we want to be supportive of others, and do something that stretches and reflect on that. For longer programs, best practice here, it's helpful to co-create those group norms. And so you can find lots of different sort of strategies for how to do that online. For single session events, it's really that kind of co-creation can take hours. But so for a single session event, it's faster to share suggested norms like I just did and allow people a moment to reflect on them. For my work around educational equity, I always encourage participants to keep in mind the framework for courageous conversation by Singleton and Litton, and you can find that online as well. All right, so at this point in the workshop, I encourage people to access our digital chart paper. Now, what is digital chart paper? So digital chart paper is essentially, it's just a Google slide deck, and I'm going to tell you what that is. So I try to give these links to people just ahead of when they're going to need it so they can go ahead and access those files. And then I go into giving them breakout group tips. I make liberal use of Zoom's breakout groups because people talk more and they learn better in those breakout groups. And so I offer some breakout tips before going into the group to help sort of, again, frame my expectations for what I want them to do and how that I want them to engage. So I give them the link so they can access the Google Slides. I encourage them to turn on their cameras. And it's surprising that people are more likely, if they don't have their camera on in the full group, they are more likely to turn their camera on in the small group. encourage someone to take the lead and help their group be successful. Give them space to do brief introductions, because a lot of times they don't know each other. And so sometimes I'll give a very specific framework for how they should do introductions. And then I always give them notes and send them chat messages. So before I send them to breakout groups, I have, my sort of signaled slide here, and I tell them about the exercise. First off, I give them a mirror of what it is that they're going to see when they go into the Google slide deck. And so I tell them what they're going to do. Again, like the more instructions, the better. And so when they go into their Google slide deck, it's going to look like this. They're going to have a place where they add notes. They're going to have a place where they add their name. The speaker notes for the slide deck are going to have more notes for the participants. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So here, I call it chart paper because it's the same thing I would do if I had a group of people in person. I would give them chart paper, post-it notes, markers, and to write their notes on there. And so what's so great about using this as a tool is I get visibility into what the groups are doing. So I can look here and see who's making progress, who's, not making it very far, like group 2 didn't make it very far in their comments. And I can also drop in and provide some feedback. So this yellow box wasn't here when I started the breakout rooms, but I added it. So you can communicate more to them. You can pop in like this. So Zoom also has a feature where you can send messages to them, but I tried to, again, over-communicate. So I send the messages there. Sometimes I'll send the messages here. And then you want to encourage people to add their names here. And then I will include extra information, like key definitions, terms, more instruction prompts to the notes of each slide. So you can see that each slide is going to basically be duplicated so that when they participate, they can see what's going on. They also get to sort of sneak around and see what the other groups are doing. And while for this demonstration, I only had one activity, I have some other programs that are like year-long programs where I have hundreds and hundreds of slides and all the activities are one after the other. And then I'll create a table of contents at the very beginning where participants can quickly link using that hyperlink table of contents. So again, you want to make it as easy as you can for your participants. So when they're in the breakout rooms, I will be sending them messages. And then when they come back, I usually give them warning, and then we do a debrief. So some best practices around breakout rooms is, number one, do them. Because people talk so much more in them and they learn in those environments. Next, if you have a co-host, you can pop into each breakout room. They may not have questions, but there seems to be some comfort in this sort of visits when you pop in. Sometimes I'll pop in and I won't even say anything. I'll just sort of listen, and if they don't need anything, then I'll pop to the next room. Some groups I pop in and they've got loads of questions. Why I say if you have a co-host, because if I'm the only host and I send everyone to a breakout room and then I join the breakout room, there's nobody in the main room. So if somebody's late or if somebody gets kicked out, then I won't know that somebody's in that main room and needs help. So that's why you can go into the other rooms if you don't have a co-host, but it kind of leaves your main room empty, and it could be problematic if people need help. So the next is that you can use the Zoom message tool to communicate with participants, and you should tell them hey, you should be on question number 2 at this point. Hey, you should be wrapping up your conversations. Hey, I'm going to close the room in 2 minutes. Okay, I've closed the room. Take the 60 seconds if you need it, but just help them pace their time and give them those warnings when you're going to wrap up. So I found that no more than one breakout session per hour is best. If you do more than that, there's just too much shuffling, and the breakouts are too fast. So if I really need them to have 2 discussions, then I'll set them up so that they have those 2 discussions and 1 breakout. Because again, it's a sort of back and forth that just sucks up time. And as I said before, the more instructions, the better. Clarity with the work product that you're asking them to do is really important. It helps them focus and stay on target. So this digital chart paper, again, like this isn't a thing. I just call like Google Slides the digital chart paper. It helps participants know exactly what to do, and it helps you be a fly on the wall to see progress. And the file that is created is a useful artifact for participants to review if they want to come back to it. As I said, you can use the speaker notes to provide as much detail and instruction as possible. You want people to add their name so that they sort of have some ownership to it. And a big thing here, for the first time using digital chart paper with a group, plan for extra time. If it's a longer engagement, the first exercise is better if it's low stakes, such as go make introductions, talk about why you're here. For a couple-hour workshop, I wouldn't do that, even necessarily for a half day, but for a full day workshop with a big enough group of people, I would do that. Because the first time seems to always have some kinks, but people get the hang of it quickly. Then you can also show the chart paper during your debriefs. So I would go, when I'm doing the debriefs, I would come here and say, okay, breakout group 1, report out, tell us what you talked about. And then I can say, Tegwin, Johnny, tell me what it is that you talked about. Breakout 2. And so you can just sort of flip through this, and it helps people, again, show their work as you're going through it. So at this point in the workshop, I had participants do an independent reflection, and I had them make 3 lists of things, what technologies or apps have they used or seen used and like, what instructional strategies have they used or seen used and like, and then what are additional tips. So the goal here was to sort of be, a collective contribution from everyone and all the expertise that people brought to the group. For these things, and I'll show you what we came up with here in a second. So after that reflection, I set them up with a tool for their conversations, for round-robin brainstorming. And so round-robin brainstorming, and you can download the PDF on my website, and so it's a really helpful tool with guidelines that you are free to share. And so round-robin brainstorming, it's where one person shares one idea at a time, and you keep going until all ideas are exhausted. And so I asked them to use this technique to work through their 3 lists. And so this is a really helpful inclusive strategy because it makes sure every voice is heard. There should be sort of equal time between them. You just keep contributing ideas, and it also helps people to build on ideas as we're going through. I think when you do this exercise, it's useful to have people reflect first. So you want to give people time to think before they go into this report out mode. And then they're not having to write things down while they're going. They're able to listen rather than having to write things down. So this is a useful tool because it is a facilitated dialogue tool. So the more tools that you can provide to facilitate breakout room discussion like this one, promote equitable, inclusive dialogue. You can provide guides like this one that I'm offering to you to help them understand the process and to potentially take it back to use in their own work. So their next assignment was to access the Jamboard, which is another Google tool. And so, again, you can access that link from my website. And then their assignment was to use that round-robin strategy to work through their lists and then add those ideas to the Jamboard. And so let's go look at the Jamboard that we created together. So this is Jamboard. When I introduce Jamboard to someone, I always help them explore the platform first. And so when you open up Jamboard, you want to tell them, like, here are the tools. Here's a pen tool. You can select whether you want a pen, a marker, highlighter, paintbrush. You can check the color. and then you can kind of demonstrate what happens. You can say, hey, you can erase it all. The mouse helps you find things and move them. Sticky notes, you want to show them how it works. So I can say, hello, world, hit enter, and it's going to stay there. If I'm done, I can hit cancel. Then I can take the sticky note, I can make it bigger. I can move it around. I can rotate it. I can do whatever I want with it. And so demonstrate that as much and give people a chance to play with the platform. You can also add images. You can also create shapes, text boxes, and then you can use this really kind of cool laser tool. This is great because people see it while they're live, and so like the other day, some people were adding some content in the wrong space, and so I was highlighting it, and then I wrote a post-it that said, you're on the wrong page. And they got it. They got the message, and then after I both wrote the post-it note, and then I used my little highlighter and was like, hey, like, go to the other page. And so that's very useful. So what our participants in the workshop came up with, again, this is accessible, anybody can look at it, but we came up with multiple best practices for learning, and the challenge that I offered to the participants is to go try these, right? Like, there's very little that I can always do to just tell you how to use it. The best way to learn how to use these tools is to use them. And so you can check out this list. You can see that we've got people said Jamboard, Hoover, Polling, Kahoot, Padlet, Flipgrid. I don't even know what all of these are, but they're worth checking out. The next slide, the next board that they created were instructional strategies, and then the next slide were some additional tips. Again, these aren't really the point of the workshop. The point of the workshop was for people to practice using this platform. While I've got you here in Jamboard, I want to show you some different ideas for how you can use this. So you can create background images. I create my images using Adobe Illustrator or some other Adobe tool. And I like the sort of rose, thorn, bud as a reflection tool. So I just made this background, dropped it in here. Sometimes I do it with participants if we're doing some strengths and challenges reflections. But people can drop it in like this. I also create backdrops that help participants process content. And so for this part of the curriculum, there are 12 pieces like this. So I have 12 boards, and then they can come through and assist them in working through their curriculum. I also create a seating chart for groups that I'm working with over a longer period of time. And it's, air quote, seating chart here. But what it does is I use various slides with different reflection tools. And so people can come and add a sticky note to their box. And then it'll pop up wherever. And then they can drag it over to their box. And then at the end of the reflection time, I can see who hasn't done it. And I can ask, like, hey, Michael, like, what's going on? Like, can we get your report out? And so this has been a really useful tool for having some accountability with people. So there is a 100% chance that if you use images, somebody will delete them because they're like trying to move something around. Tell them ahead of time that this is likely to happen, and tell them to hit Control-Z and it pops it back in, because it can be a pain if you're in the middle of a workshop and then you've got to go find that image again to pop it back in there. Another tool that you can use is if you have the Jamboard app on your tablet, you can, and if you have like a pencil, you can quickly write on the boards live, and you can circle between different ideas that maybe are on Post-its. Somebody asked, like, how do you make a straight line? And so I think they told me how to do it. I think you use like a shift. You hold down shift. Yeah. You hold down shift as you create a line, and it makes the line straight. Because otherwise, if you've got a pen, it's kind of crooked. But if you hold down shift when you start the line, click, then it's going to make it a straight line wherever you go. But you can also use the box tool. You can also use the box tool to create a box and shrink it. So again, this is a really useful tool to kind of play around with. You are limited, you have a couple of limits on Jamboard. So you're limited by the number of boards that you can create. I think it's like 20 or something. And you're limited by the number of people that can access the board. So the tech documents say that it's 50 people, but I've had it be less. And you never know when it's going to be less, but Jamboard is a good tool when you want a bunch of people to contribute to a single page. Like you wouldn't really be able to do that with a Google slide because there's only so many different places to type. Again, just like you were in a physical workshop, it's like everybody write Post-its and let's go put them on the appropriate chart paper. That's what you're kind of mimicking there. I think Jamboard is a great tool. It's free. There are lots of other tools that have popped up into the market, but they're not free. And everything adds up if you keep paying for these services. And a lot of them, the entry level sort of pricing, it's only for like 20 people. And a lot of times my workshops have from over 50 up to 100 people, and that can just kind of get unwieldy. So again, I dig Jamboard because it's free and it's fairly easy to use, and people tend to like it. Another link that is another instructional tool is Constructivist Listening. And so Constructivist Listening is just another way to help sort of facilitate people's conversations. And so again, this handout is available on my website, and it helps sort of people map through this process. In the live workshop, we did a Slido poll. I honestly don't use Slido polls very much in my work, but I certainly see its usefulness. In general, I don't do that much polling using the polling tools because as it stands, it's really required a lot of kind of pre-set up, and sometimes I'm using other people's Zoom platforms. And so I create tools or like screen layouts, or I use Jamboard. I use all these other tools that help people do polls. Because again, the least amount of technologies that you can push on people in a given amount of time, the better served that they're going to be. So one of the question I offered to them on Slido was, what else do they want to learn? And so then we spent the last hour or so doing that. A couple of other notes is that Google Slides has a closed caption feature. So if you don't have closed captioning figured out on your Zoom platform, you can turn it on here. So once you're in presentation mode, you hover over this little CC here, and it will start picking up everything I'm saying. It's imperfect at best. There's no punctuation. So the live transcript version is actually much better. Also, Google has a really cool Q&A feature. And so what happens is I'll click the Q&A here. And so it opens up this audience tool. So this is the speaker note page here. And I can say I want to start new. And so your participants can go to this link. So I can click it. It's a hyperlink for me, but for participants, they're going to be seeing your screen, so it won't be hyperlinked. So you'd want to drop this link into the chat. And so if a participant goes to the Q&A here, what they'll see is the screen, and I'll click here and say, I want to ask a question. I could ask as myself, I could ask anonymously, and I can click submit, and people can vote. And so because I'm the only one doing this right now as a recording, you can't see this, but if other people vote, it will help filter the messages. So the things that are getting the most thumbs up will bubble up. If the things are getting thumbs down, they sort of filter down. So this is a really great tool when you are, and so you can see back here on your speaker notes. If I had notes, they'd be here. The audience tools are here. As I'm speaking, this is dynamic, so it will change and say, hey, you need to resync, and it'll sort of bubble things up to the top. I use this when I'm doing keynotes for large groups if the chat feature on whatever platform is turned off, because I like having contact with my audience. If you get to a point where you want to stop accepting questions, I can turn them off like this. But again, as a speaker, how I would set this up, as I showed you on the setup screen, is I would put my slide notes right here, and my slides would be on the other screen. And so you can see maybe right there where I could pick up the audience tools and see what's happening. So I'm going to turn off Q&A. I'm going to turn it off here. So when I turn it off, it takes away the banner there. And then I can go back to full screen mode. I'm going to turn off the CC here. For the NAEP consultants, we've got a couple of tools that I encourage you to access on Action Plan and Reflection Tool for both the career and the micromessaging unit. You can find those in the file paths link there, and then also referenced in our communications. So almost every single workshop that I do, I end in some kind of reflection. And I like a 3-2-1 model where they write down 3 things that they learned, 2 things that they'll do differently, and 1 immediate action item related to what they learned today. I don't want them to make a to-do list of laundry and dishes, right? And depending on the group, I'll do report outs. So I try to save 15 minutes at the end, 10 to 15 minutes, and I will go around virtually around the room. I'll call out people's names and say, tell us what's your one action item or one thing from your list of 6. And again, this is just an inclusive strategy that brings everyone to the space and is a useful tool. Again, this is a recording of a live workshop. All the resources will be available on my website that you can download. If you have any questions on some more best practices for virtual learning, certainly let me know. Share your best practices in the comments or on my website, and I look forward to learning from you. Again, this is certainly not the panacea of solutions. It is just what has worked best for me using some of the Google tools. And I'll share some more references on my webpage that include some papers that have come out by some trusted colleagues on thinking about best practices from an instructional standpoint around student engagement, active learning, and whatnot. This series of comments was really about sort of just getting things set up, the sort of tactical approaches for using technology and communicating and engaging participants in this way. All right, thank you so much.